relationships, fashion, trends, and all things topical. She is the content queen.
Facebook, YouTube, Twitter.
Time to find out what Kristi's blogging about on Fly 92.3.
All right, the blog is on the edge. Writes for the Times Union, timesunion.com. The woman is Kristi Gustafson Barlette. Good morning, Kristi. How are you today?
Good morning. The woman is Kristi Gustafson Barlette, and the woman does not understand this topic we're talking about today.
Okay, yeah, this is, once again, I think some of our most interesting and intriguing conversations happen when we're trying to figure out what the topic is going to be, and then we just get sidetracked during brainstorming meetings, and we were talking about city shaming or zip code shaming.
Yeah, which is basically the idea. I would say there's a handful of cities around here. Sometimes your zip code doesn't match up with where you actually live. So you maybe live in Guilderland, but your zip code says Albany, or you live in Loudonville and your zip code says Albany or Colonie. Yet people are very, very obsessed with having like the right town and the right name, almost like having the correct handbag. So they'll change where they live a little bit. So they live in Cohoes, but they'll say they live in Colonie because it's close enough and they don't want to live in Cohoes.
Right. It's one of the things that you can get away with. I mean, and for whatever reason, and I do understand why people say it, but it does go along with various stereotypes and stuff like that. Yeah. So it's not like a pleasant thing to talk about.
Right.
But it definitely exists. And you got so many comments from your readers, and I'm sure our listeners are going to jump in too if they want in one of our next segments at 476-9200. But let's factor out of the equation like what your zip code is versus where you live. Let's just sort of factor in the people who made comments about what people would think of them, either one way or another, if they said the actual town or city that they live in versus how they want it to be perceived.
Okay, so one of them definitely, like I said, was Cohoes. Cohoes came up a lot. People didn't want to say they live in Cohoes, so they'll say they live in Colonie because it's close enough by. And several years ago, I remember I did a story on this, and I remember one of the realtors telling me that at closing, somebody got there and it said they lived in Cohoes and they wanted their house to be in Colonie, so they didn't close on the house.
Oh, my gosh. At the closing?
Yeah. Yeah, which
God,
is crazy
terrible
to me.
Listen, I live in Cohoes, and I'm proud to say I live in Cohoes. However, I have to confess, when I lived in Troy, people would say, oh, well, where do you live? And I'm like, I live in Troy, but like North Greenbush. Because I didn't want them to think I lived in Troy proper.
Right.
Because there was a lot of crime at the time when I lived there. So I wanted them to know that I lived kind of on the outskirts of Troy, more towards North Greenbush.
Right.
And I was totally guilty of that.
Yeah.
Well, when you say about crime, Schenectady seems to be another one. When people live in Schenectady, they'll push it just a bit to either say they live in Niskayuna or Rotterdam because they feel like Schenectady has that negative connotation of crime. And obviously, it's not all crime-ridden. You know, there's some areas of crime,
Right.
but Schenectady has really a lot of beautiful parts. Or people will say, well, Schenectady, but near Union College.
Right.
So that's a nice part.
Right. Boy, it does seem it is a lot of, it is a lot of Cohoes and it's a lot of Schenectady and Troy to some degree, although people see
but
Troy
it's turning around. Yeah,
Troy seems to be like definitely on the uptick, so people are a little bit more proud of it. But the thing is, like, what annoys me is that people who live in Loudonville.
That's the big one.
That is a big one, right? They'll never want to say that they live in Albany, even if their mailing address or their zip code is Albany.
And it mostly is, isn't it?
They'll always be like, no, it's Loudonville and stuff. But yeah, when people from Loudonville leave town and people ask them where they're from, they say they're from Albany. So listen, you can't have it both ways.
Right, because no one outside of here would have heard of Loudonville, and nobody outside of here is impressed by Loudonville. But there'll be people who are right on the cusp.
That annoys me.
The other one is if you're on the cusp of North Colonie and South Colonie. Now, I didn't know this until a few years ago because to me, Colonie was Colonie. But my husband's from Colonie, so I learned the whole dynamic of apparently people want to be from North Colonie and not South Colonie. So if they're from North Colonie, they'll say North Colonie. But if they're from South Colonie, they'll just say Colonie. Because apparently everyone wants to push themselves over the border to North Colonie.
I hear that one all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, all the time from parents. It's like, oh yeah, no, my kids are in the North Colonie School District. You never hear parents, and I'm sure the schools are fantastic, but you never hear parents say it the same way about their kids who are in, my kids are in the South Colonie School District. Right. And I'm not saying that to be funny.
Right.
And I'm not trying to.
No, but it seems like that's the norm.
You just don't hear it. Listen, I do understand it, though. I mean, I do get it. And I'm not agreeing necessarily with the stereotypes, but I understand that there are some connotations that go with certain cities. It does seem to me like if I had to put one on the list, number one on the list is Cohoes. People will say, and Watervliet, people will not say
Watervliet too.
And there's no
I've
reason.
lived in both of those towns, and I've always said Watervliet, Cohoes. Now I know because I felt like I shamed Troy, and I didn't mean to.
And they're both great cities and towns, and I've been to Watervliet. We've been to the high school. We've done function there.
Yeah, Cohoes too.
We have friends in Cohoes. You live in Cohoes. They're great. But listen, if you can hear the falls, the Cohoes Falls, like from your backyard,
guess where you live.
You don't live in Latham. Because I don't hear them. We're in Latham.
Right.
I don't hear the falls.
Well, actually,
there was one in Saratoga County too. Well, there's two.
Okay.
All right, hey,
Everyone
I'll tell you
either
what.
wants to live in Saratoga Springs
Yeah.
or Clifton Park. They don't want to live in Half Moon. They don't want to be in Wilton. So they will say Saratoga Springs or Clifton Park. Now, I mean, I don't know. I look at Saratoga County. I'm like, it's all beautiful. Who cares?
Right.
But a lot of people care, and a lot of people will push it. And they'll say, well, I tell people Saratoga because everyone understands it, and they won't know Greenfield Center or they won't know Gansmore. But really, it's everyone wants to say Saratoga Springs because it has this panache.
Zip code shaming. What were some of the reader comments that you got, Kristi?
Well, Mallory Ann said, I live in East Greenbush, but my zip code is 12144, a.k.a. Rensselaer, ... Terrible.
Oh my
wow.
God.
People
awful.
don't want to be associated with it.
Rensselaer's another one, too.
They all want to push themselves to East Greenbush, it seems.
Wow.
Another
crazy.
woman said, you know what, if you have a $500,000 home in Guilderland, you do not want people to think you're in a $30,000 home in Schenectady.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Okay, now we are on to something.
Well, and then someone else said, I get so annoyed when people give their addresses, either Scotia, Glenville, Rotterdam, or Niskayuna. It's all Schenectady. She's like 12300 something. You live in Schenectady? Okay, I just had to get that off my chest, she said.
Great.
And I think what it comes down to is people are so worried about what other people think. It's like if you just have pride in your town and we're like, yeah, I'm from Cohoes or I'm from Schenectady or I'm from Rensselaer, it would just eventually change the impression of it.
Yeah, people do
Yeah,
it.
I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually,
That
you're
is a
right.
great point.
It starts with the person,
It does.
the individual.
One woman on here, I'm from Averill Park, and one woman on here said people like kind of give her a look when she says she's from Averill Park. Until this, I didn't know that Averill Park had a negative connotation, but I will still proudly say, hey, I'm from Averill Park.
I don't know that it has a negative connotation. I just think people think that it's just out in the sticks.
Yeah, well, because it is.
Is this a real connotation?
Thank you, Kristi. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you next week.
Bye, guys.